I'm Mary Balkan. I'm a professor of English here at Seton Hall.
I'm Debbie Santacola. I teach in the College of Education and Human Services.
Okay, so we are both, I think, we both teach classes that involve a lot of discussion. And even though we've been trying to, I've been teaching now for about 35 years altogether, and it is still a challenge to get that to happen. And so I think Deb has some experiences.
And being in the College of Ed, whether you're teaching 4th grade, 12th grade, higher ed, some of the techniques are the same, so I'm bringing a lot of experience from K-12 as well, but also here in our classes where we teach people how to be teachers. These are things we practice, model, and have them practice in class so that they can go out and hold discussions as well. So together we teamed up and thought we'd share a couple things, and there's so much. There's volumes written on the topic, so we just selected some quick tips for you.
Right, yes, absolutely. All right, so the way this is going to be organized, I'm going to go first and basically just take you through some quick tips, 10 tips that I've learned over the years, have used pretty much all of them. And then Deb is going to take you through some activities and show you some of the results of the activities she actually, the results she got from her students. So, the goal, right? We would really like to have lively discussion in our classes. We want students speaking to one another, right? But in fact, we are usually our own worst enemy when we want to have that happen. And so today we're going to try to provide some strategies to help you facilitate and promote discussion. So, do you want me to do this quick, right, or wait till later? Okay. So we went back and forth about where to put some of these activities. So, but this would be a good moment to do this kind of thing. We're not going to do it today. So, what do we mean by discussion anyway, right? As I tell my classes, it's not a Socratic dialogue. Like, that's not really a discussion, even though that's really what they're used to. And so here you see some of the various forms of discussion that you often get, right? And these are actually described in this article when students lead the discussion. So one is the tennis match, right? Banging back and, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm asking.
Can you see?
Well, I can't, but that's because I was stupid and left my glasses. Is this PowerPoint going to be available in some way, or do I
Yes.
need to? Yes. So
Yes.
if it's on the PowerPoint, I don't need to.
Yes, I will post the PowerPoint.
Great. Okay.
And we're actually filming this. So we're videotaping this, so I need a permission from you at some point that I have to sign that.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, no, I'll definitely put it up. The tennis match, with the teacher sends out questions and the students respond, but there's really no interaction, right? The whirlpool, everybody kind of works around the subject. They don't really make any conclusions necessarily. You slowly move toward a deeper penetration, but and that might be enough. That might be all you need. The eclectic beaded necklace, students contribute independently or sequentially without much connection. They're not talking to one another, they're still talking to you. And maybe again, that might be what you want to have happen. There's a range of discussion that's possible. The tour bus, you go from place to place to place. The urban sprawl, the life raft, I mean, I have to go through all of these, right? The Wild West train, that was the one that was added at the last minute by somebody who was responding to this. So there are all different varieties, right? What kind of discussions do you tend to have, and what would be your ideal? Right? I mean, I think that's the starting point. What is it you really want to have happen in your classes? So, I want students talking to each other. My ideal would be that I can sit there, I can get the ball rolling, I can get it started, and then they will actually talk to one another and work through a topic. I'm still there, but that's what I'm hoping would happen. So, in order to have a discussion-oriented class, though, your students need prep. They need setup. You can't just go in and say, okay, now we're going to discuss, and think that you're going to get an effective discussion. It just doesn't work that way. First of all, think of the high school classes they've been in. They've been in that tennis match scenario most of their life. I ask a question, you answer the question. I ask a question, and this is what they're used to. So when you push them past that, they get very nervous, very hesitant, many of them. We will talk about the ones who aren't so hesitant, how to deal with them. But you need to explain what you mean by discussion for your class. We're not trying to dictate what a discussion should look like. You might not be comfortable with the kind of free-for-all where everybody is plowing through material and maybe even getting some things wrong and you need to fix things later. You might, you might want something a little more moderated. All good. But explain what you mean by discussion to them as opposed to a Socratic dialogue, for example. And then talk about why it's expected, right? What you hope they'll gain from it, and any ground rules. So, for example, whether you want them to raise their hands or not often depends on the size of the class and the exuberance of class members, right? What kinds of contributions do you expect? It can't just be, well, you're getting credit for a contribution because you're simply saying, oh yeah, I agree with him, right? Oh, I had a similar experience, and then you hear a personal narrative about it. It's lovely, but it's not really pushing the topic any further. And then, of course, some guidelines on civility. Some people hand things out about what kind of classroom behavior they expect. Some people put it in the syllabus. But certainly our students need to understand the give and take of civilized discourse, right? How to disagree with someone without being rude or obnoxious. How to be disagreed with without bursting into tears, right? Taking it seriously, taking it personally, right? Seriously is one thing, but taking it personally. So it's really important to have that conversation with your class early on in the semester, at least before you try to do a discussion or have discussion as part of the class. And this, I find, is actually, it seems like a no-brainer, but this is really key. Not only do you have to say you're going to have discussion, you have to commit to having it. You cannot give in. You cannot cave. You cannot give up. You cannot wave the white flag and say, okay, that's it. I tried for the last 3 minutes. No one's talking. I'm going back to lecturing. It doesn't work that way. I know. So, as I said, we fall so easily back into lecture mode. Acknowledge that students are going to prefer lecture, most of them. They would rather sit there as passive observers and recipients of your wisdom and knowledge, and you're trying to get them to do something else. Try not to get sidetracked by questions, because that's another ploy, right? The students have learned them all, right? They don't really want to have this conversation among themselves. It's challenging, it makes their heads hurt a little bit, it puts them on the spot, it makes them the owners of this material. They don't like any of that, generally. I didn't like it. So a lot of times comprehension questions will get in the way of your attempt. This is not to say you shouldn't try to explain things that they don't understand. And we'll talk about, in a minute, I'll talk about how you should frame this. I think you should frame a discussion. Try to address that stuff early on. But you can also say, you know what, we'll address some of those things later. Make sure you're all on the same page. You can't start a discussion cold. So some of the activities that Deb is going to do with you later speak to this. You have to warm up the class with activities of some kind. At least this has been my experience, I think Deb's as well. But warm them up with some sort of activity. You have to prime the pump, you have to get the wheels oiled, whatever it is, the gears oiled. So it can be as simple as 5 minutes of in-class writing, which you either collect or don't collect. You can have them posted in Blackboard if they've got their laptops. Post it, close your laptops, let's get back to work, and let's actually have this conversation. But they are going to need to be warmed up somehow. I usually, to try to counteract the comprehension questions and to deal with them right away, to make sure we're all on the same page and we understand the basic facts of the material, I start with a quick overview, right? Background, context. I'll ask somebody to do a thumbnail sketch, give me a quick overview of the plot, right? Okay, so I'm teaching literature, well, all the time, I guess. Trying to think if I'm ever teaching anything else, but I don't think so. I'm in a discipline where the Salem witchcraft trial transcripts are considered literature, so just so you know. It's even better if you can have a student give that overview and background, because once you've heard, I'm sure you've heard this old chestnut. Once they hear their voice in the room, they are much more likely to speak again. So it can be as, if you ask somebody a plot question or a basic factual question, especially starting out with some of the shyer people, you can often get them to talk again later. They'll speak again. They realize, the world will not end, the walls will not crumble. So here again, asking any questions about the material, what don't they get. But even if they're a little confused, it can still lead to some productive discussion because they can answer one another's questions while this is happening. Okay, so and this is one of the tough things at this university. You need a space for discussion. You can certainly try it, but I have not found that sitting in rows facing the front of the room is conducive to conversation, right? I mean, look at this arrangement now. If I said we should all talk together as a group, but you can't move your chairs, right? I mean, how far would we get? You'd be able to talk to the people at your own table, and maybe the person sitting behind you, but you know, you would not get much other conversation going. So, I'll tell you now that I have seen miraculous things done with some of the worst classrooms on this campus. Those tiny little airplane rooms in Jubilee Hall, most of our 1201 core English 1 and 2 classes are held in there. And you can still do things. I don't know if you've seen these rooms. There are like 4 or 5 tables on each side, 2 seats facing the front. And what am I supposed to do with this? How do I put them in a circle? Because of course that would be my preference. You can do it. You can take all those tables and you can make one big seminar table in the middle of that room. I've seen it done. Yes, there's not a lot of walking space, but there's not a lot of walking space in there anyway, so really what does it matter? And if you get them to do the room arranging and the breakdown, unless of course you're being followed by a like-minded colleague who doesn't mind having the room set up that way, always good to find out. But if you get them to set up the room when they get there, and they can do it in 2 minutes flat, they are also now taking ownership of that space. And they're getting ready for what they know is to come. Some sort of interaction. So and let me pause for a moment to say, discussion doesn't have to be 75 minutes beginning to end. Discussion can be 15 minutes at some point. It can be 75 minutes from beginning to end. You design the classes, of course. You figure out what makes sense in your room. So I'm just, you know, Deb and I are both just trying to help you see the way past some of the obstacles we've certainly encountered. So having them sit in a circle or some other way where they can see one another. You know what? Push the tables out of the way and make them sit on the floor, for God's sake. You know, they'll love it. You know, there's always a way to do it. It just takes a little bit of ingenuity. And frankly, they'll help. If you even ask them, how can we do this? How can we make this a better conversation space? And it's better to have it that way from the beginning, because if you try to move this furniture in the middle of class, it just takes up time and it's disruptive. And frankly, this is where we go back to the earlier slide, which is commit to discussion. Because at that moment, you're going to look at them sitting in their rows, you're going to be like, I can't be bothered moving the furniture, let's just stay here. And of course, then the discussion is going to flow, because no one can see one another and they can't speak to each other. Explain that they should be speaking to everyone in the room. This is so hard. They only want to talk to you, right? They look at you, they speak to you. Over and over again, I have to remind them, you're not speaking to me, I'm ignoring you. Speak to people outside. So I do have...
You know how you solve that? You stand where I am.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't stand in the front. I stand in the back of the room.
Right.
For much of my class.
Exactly, yes. Put yourself outside the circle, or at least a little bit out of view, so that they can't see you, and so they can have a conversation. I mean, I'm always in a typical class, I'm usually in the circle. I tend not to move around anymore. Well, in a way you can sort of see why, because I basically have ants in my pants. I cannot stand in one spot for very long, and this is mild. I've only had 1 cup of tea today. But usually, I stopped walking around the front of the room because my students complained that I was making them dizzy. So I'd be like, bang, bang, bang. Oh yeah, So I found, okay. And even while I'm sitting, I'm always doing something. I'm playing with my pen, or drinking tea, or something. But I've realized that I need to, you know, I need to be among them, or if you really want the discussion of just them talking to one another. And in fact, you could even start that way, right? You can join the circle maybe a few classes in.
Then you just pull up a chair and you listen a little bit around,
Yeah.
you know, and then you can...
Right, exactly. Okay, so tip number 5. Yeah.
So I teach in the campus garden.
Oh.
I'm Wanda
One of the lucky ones.
Hi.
Okay.
And so that's my classroom.
Cool.
So the kids are different outside.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I said
No.
students. But it's magical. So I encourage everyone to use the garden as their classroom. It's not my classroom, it's everyone's classroom, and so it was created.
Tell everybody where it is.
So it's right next to Xavier, right here between the campus center and
By
Xavier.
the University Center, yeah.
So it's any time that it's above 40 degrees, that's where we are. So, and you tell them, dress for send them an email in advance. We're going to be outside of the classroom, and so, or we go up to the greenhouse and we, so the greenhouse is another space on the top of McNulty, and so there's spaces for, you know, conversation that is unique.
Right. Well, that's good, because actually I was talking to our teaching assistants last week, and I was actually saying, well, because you have to remember, new teachers, young teachers who are easily manipulated by our students on the very first nice day to go outside. But without a lot of experience on how to keep a class engaged and focused on you, and really there aren't so many spaces if you don't know about them. If you just go outside and sit behind Faye, for example, you know, there's a little traffic, people are playing football and all that other stuff. So I think that's good if we can find some real, because the good thing about these spaces is they're kind of enclosed.
Right, and there's tables.
Right, so yeah, it's not sitting on the ground, it's not that they're kind of drifting off or wandering off with their friends or being distracted by, you know, that group of kids over there doing, I do the same thing, I call them kids all the time. So, but that's great, it's good to know. Yes, please interrupt at any point. We will have a lot of conversation and Q&A when we go through the depth section as well. So, coming prepared for discussion, open-ended questions. I don't know about you, I have a very hard time developing questions that actually lend themselves to discussion, as opposed to questions that just seem to require fairly straightforward answers. So it's a battle, even if you can come with one or two. And some of you, if you're good at it, please let me know, because I could use a lesson.
I love making questions.
Oh, good.
I mean, over time, I hone them. Like every year, like I said, I know I keep on working on them. If you have a good question, it really makes a difference.
Right.
It just seems to get a life of its own.
Right.
And you're right. Some questions just fall flat. Like, why did I ask that way? And so it really is about pre-planning on your part for the discussion, rather than walking through and say, I think I'll have a discussion today. Like, you really, really do have to think through what you want it to look like, and then what you need to do to make it look that way. You'll have a better chance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've tried having students generate questions with mixed results. Questions are hard for us to develop. They are harder for students to develop. I'm not saying we shouldn't still try it. What I sometimes do is ask everybody in the class to generate a question and collect them, and then just use the ones that are the better ones. You know, I mean, and so I'll make it, well, you know us, right? If you're good at this, if you've done this for a number of years, you can make something look like it's accidental when it's actually very, very planned out, right? I mean, like, oh, I know that kid's handwriting and that one asks good questions. Or you make sure you get like the questions from the people who ask good questions, like on the top of the pile or something. Or you just take a quick look at them while they're doing something else. I don't know. But I don't want anybody to feel bad. In fact, it's funny, I was just having a conversation with one of my grad students yesterday, and they write analyses. They actually come to class with something written, and I specifically do this. Want to check that they're reading, but mainly because they actually have something to say. So I've been doing this 1.5 to 2-page written assignment weekly for years now. And it works really well, except this year I tried something new. And one of them had said that he felt like when I went around the room and asked everybody to tell what they were writing about, that was good, except nobody then wanted to, when I said, okay, what question should we start with? No one wanted to volunteer themselves or pick out somebody else because they felt like it would be an insult to everybody else. It's like, you're dealing with human dynamics in these rooms that are sometimes really working against you. So this is my plan. I'm basically going to jot down things that I'm going to pick. We're going to start with you. But yeah, have some open-ended questions. But here's the other trick. For the discussion piece at least, if you over-plan, I find that, at least for me, I tend to then take control. I actually am better posing and asking questions that I am struggling to answer. Because then I am less inclined to jump in there with a definitive answer and say, well, what about this or that, and push the discussion in a way I want it to go. I legitimately want to know, and I want to hear what they have to say. And that's really important. Students need to know that you are interested in what they have to say.
And that we're all learners.
Right, absolutely.
It's not just you learning and me learning.
Right. Yeah, so that's very helpful as well. And here's the other thing. It's so hard. So hard. You need to shut up. This is not something we do well or easily. I know I have a hard time with this. I tell my students all this all the time and they laugh. I used to be a shy blossom once. I was. I'm still generally very quiet and frankly a little antisocial. If you ask my family. Yeah, so I mean, I go home to a husband who doesn't come home till about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night and no children. So, it's good. Anyway, but think of all these things that we actually do, right? We ask a question, we don't get an answer within 10 seconds. I don't even think we wait 30 seconds. Because I just did an exercise again with this group of TAs, and we timed a minute. And a minute is an eternity.
Painful.
Rebecca Wave. This is Rebecca Levy. She is one of our TAs this semester, and she's helping me today. So yeah, painful. So you're not even waiting 30 seconds. You're waiting maybe 10 seconds, right? I don't have the second hand on this, right? Test you all. Don't repeat the question. Ask the question. Let it sit there. Because, and again, this might be the question that's launching the discussion. It might be, you might ask a few questions to get things rolling. We're not saying you just go in, drop the bomb, and then whoo, discussion happens miraculously. You know, you're going to have to move things along, at least in the beginning. So, but don't repeat your question.
And in education, we call that wait time.
Right.
And the reason that it's important is while they're thinking of and answering your question, you're actually interrupting their thinking by asking it again.
Right, exactly.
And then they think, is this a different question
Right.
now? And then they think about it again, and then you come up with another way to rephrase it. And so you're really interrupting the process. And if you keep doing it and be consistent with your wait time, they know you're not going to save them.
Right.
That they really are going to have to, someone's going to have to step up.
Right. Well, and the example I would use too is, think about listening to Deb talk just now, or listening to me talk a few minutes ago. How much actual creative thinking are you able to do when that's going on? None. All you could, I mean, so when we ask a question and then we start asking it again or rephrasing it because we immediately think they don't understand it, we find 5 different ways to say it. You know, I remember having teachers like this as a student. I'm sitting there just thinking to myself, shut up. I can't think. You know, if you would just be quiet for a minute, and I am that kind of a student, I need that space to be able to think. Some students are not. They are right there. But many of the students, many of us as people, I think, we need a little bit of breathing room. So to just not talk. After a student has given a response, this is the other thing we do, and this is another death blow to discussion. So I ask a question to get things rolling, responds, Roberta responds, but when Brittany responds, I say, yeah, that's a really good point, Brittany, and you have to comment on it. And then you go, and then you wait for the next person to say something. Well, that person is probably so intimidated by Brittany's brilliant response that they don't want to say anything. But even still, it's that same thing. It's like getting snagged on like a piece of material getting snagged on like rough wood or something. You're not allowing things to flow. Just let Brittany have her say, and let somebody else. And then this is also part of training. You're training your students. They should respond to Brittany, and you can just wait till someone does.
Without the judgment of, oh, your
Right.
answer was awesome, you know, and then
Yeah.
everyone else is sitting there, oh, it was fine, you know.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so,
Or adding to it, elaborating on it, finessing it, making it better somehow. So yeah.
I was just gonna say, I always used to feel like I always had to provide like a meaningful response to my students
Right.
in class, so that they knew that I was listening or that I gave them some sort of positive feedback or communicated it somehow. And so now I set, when I want a discussion to go that way, I set the stage like and tell them right away, I'm not gonna say anything, I'm just gonna smile and nod.
Right.
And and it kind of becomes a joke as we go through because they stop and I'm just like, you know, and then we go to the next person. But I have to make a rule and like a game out of it because I'm so tempted to
and
engage
what
with
was the
them.
result of that, from you practicing doing that?
Oh, it's great. It's
How?
great.
How is it great?
Because I don't control where it goes. You know, the next person controls what happens.
And what are some of you afraid of when she says that? I don't know where it's gonna go. You're getting like,
Yeah.
Veering off target.
so,
Well, I mean, you do have the power to interject when you feel like you need to. And this isn't my only mode of discussion, it's one of them. And I feel like you can definitely gauge whether or not, you know, I can break the rule, you know, I'm the teacher. But generally, I've never really found myself in a position where I do.
Right. Yeah. Well, remember too, discussion is not for generating factual information. Right, when you're trying to convey information in a class, discussion is not the way to do it. Discussion really is, right, for engaging an idea, a topic, a concept, something you really want students to think about and to wrestle with. There's no wrestling with facts. and there's no wrestling with the content of the course per se, right? That stuff is covered in the lectures you do and so on. In that preparatory, that opening material, I mean, I could sometimes spend up to a half hour, even in a 75-minute class, lecturing, giving the background on something new that we're moving into or something complicated. So the discussion, I'm not so worried about whether things go off track, because sometimes, you know, that's the teachable moment, right? That's the moment where you get the revelations of students. But again, it's not appropriate for all the kinds of information we're trying to disseminate necessarily, or the things we want them to learn. Because again, you know, I think we're trying to get away from too much information dissemination and more them learning and developing. Processing. Processing these ideas too. Encouraging them to ask one another questions is also useful. So if somebody says something, so if you've kind of trained them in this method where they know if Brittany says something, someone else in the class needs to say something. Either build on what she said, or ask her a question, or even bring up another point that might be related, but they need to get into that habit. I mean, this is how we have conversations, right? As adults, and they need to understand that it's no different anywhere else. But there are challenges, right? Doesn't always go smoothly, and not just because they won't talk. That's, you know, that takes time, and you can't, goes back to what was the slide, tip number 2, don't get discouraged, just commit to it. But when things do go off track badly, right? So for example, I remember having a conversation, I was telling my grad students today, and one of the students in the class mistakenly thought that Flannery O'Connor was a man, the famous Southern American writer, who was actually female. And so the conversation started going in this very weird direction because the student was defending this stuff on the basis of Flannery O'Connor's gender. And so at that moment, you do need to step in and say, you know, and you can see what happens though. See, I always give them a little bit of time. They should be able to self-correct, right? Hopefully, they can self-correct. But if they can't, you don't want to be, you know, perpetuating this information. That's not good. So you can back in and say, you know, wait a minute, let's just, I think we've gotten a little off track here. Let's back up to, and pick a relevant point. So again, one of the things I noted is, if you're jotting down things, first of all, it keeps you busy, so you're not going to interrupt and intrude too often, hopefully. But also then you can remember, okay, well, this was a really good point. Let's go back to this point and pick up again, right? If the student is dominating the discussion. So of course, this is one of the banes of good discussion, right? I heard a wonderful technique yesterday. We were interviewing for new TAs, and Robin Cunningham said that one of the techniques she uses in her freshman studies classes is the mute. M-U-T-E, right? So she'll tell students, when you're talking too much, I'm going to mute you. And she explains what it means, and she says it has nothing to do with the quality or whatever, but at certain points I need to have other people speak, and so every so often if somebody just won't stop raising the hand, talking, she'll say, okay, you're muted now. And they know they are not allowed to speak until she unmutes them. You know, now again, you can get a class to go along with this if they understand that it's good natured and everyone is susceptible to it. And it's not a judgment about what they're saying. In fact, you can say, it's often you're saying really good things, but everybody else is relying on you and you are the crutch now. Everybody's going to keep their mouth shut until, because you're going to do all the work for them. So you can bring the group back. If they dominate the discussion, you can figure out tools and strategies for keeping them quiet. So I've even had people who've used like Robert's rules. No one else gets to speak until somebody else, everybody else has spoken, right? Or at least everybody who wants to say something. Many instructors will start calling on people just to get things rolling because they might not be so forthcoming, so a lot of discussion can be an obstacle. And if it starts to get unmanageable, really out of control, you might just sort of bring it back to, okay, let's take a breath, or maybe we need to, you know, let me call on a few people, let's get things back to where they were. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I'm going to get into having you actually do some things. But for me, the best moments are when the class takes off on its own, has a conversation in which I am an interested and engaged observer. You can, let's see, so there are a few ways to get there. explain to them that you'll start with a question, and then you're not going to speak for 15 minutes. It doesn't sound like a lot of time, but that's a lot of time to let them just have complete run of the show. And then if they are going well, and bless you, you can also just extend it each time you want to do it. So remember, I'm at least, I think you would be too, we're talking about a whole semester process, right? Of guiding a class and getting them to think this way. Just imagine, if we all did this, we would all reap the rewards, right? And we all do this in freshman English, right? They're very discussion-oriented classes. So they know how to do this, people.
And journeys.
Yes, they know how to do this. They are forced to do this in 1201 and 1202. So don't let them tell you otherwise. I had a student once in my 1202 class tell me that he didn't know MLA format from 1201. He had me for 1201. You know, it's one of those moments, they're so used to using those excuses, I never learned this. Wait a minute. You and me, and I know we went over this. So anyway, and even if they're making some mistakes, you might want to wait and see and work it out. Finally, this is a big issue. Students don't have any idea why they're talking. Like really, basically, most of them will think they're discussing because you're too lazy to do anything. You're tired of lecturing. You want to sit there and just like not do anything for 15, 20 minutes or more. And they don't understand, one, why it's happening, and two, what they're supposed to get out of it. Of course, more sophisticated students do, but many don't. So at the end, there is a framing, right? We start out by kicking things off, by providing context and so on, by talking about what happened in the last class. And then we end by pulling it all together. So that's when we do step in. Now sometimes we can ask the student to do it too, right? As they get better. So what did you get out of this? Ask them to write down. Is this one of your strategies? Okay. Ask them to write down at the end, what were the top 3 things you learned in this conversation? And you know, it's a little slip of paper, they can email it to you, they can not do anything, they can you know, hand it in, whatever. But you also want them to not feel like they've missed things. We're not all good listeners, right? And if it's not written on the board or in a PowerPoint, a lot of them will feel like, you know, this was pointless, I didn't even understand half of what was being said. But if you do that wrap-up at the end, it can be useful. Oh, by the way, I also do note takers in classes like this. I was doing it for years, and then I stopped. I started teaching more upper-level classes, but I used to assign a note taker in every class because I got tired of students writing to me to say, I was out, did I miss anything? Yeah. We sat there mourning your absence. Right? Why would we do anything without you in the room? How silly. Ridiculous. So I got it, but not only that, but students who are not good note takers, and it's really good practice. And then we post the notes in Blackboard at the end of every class. So if you do it for the discussion, and I would usually in a discussion I might do 2 note takers because people hear different things. But that's nice too. It keeps 2 of them, especially your really, really quiet ones. Actually, no, maybe your really noisy ones. Get the talkers to take the notes. And then post the notes so that they have something, an idea of what happened. And there's a feeling of closure. And there's something for the people who weren't there. So I think it has to be regular. If you want discussion to happen, you need to do it on a regular basis. It doesn't say every class. I would say at least, depending on when you meet, like weekly maybe, bi-weekly. But if you only do it, you know, once a month, students are not going to pick up those habits of participation, right? They need to have a regular reinforcement of these behaviors, right? This is not so different from everything else we do. And so I thought this was a good quote. Discussions shouldn't be islands in a course. They should be regions within a country with borders that touch or overlap, where students can navigate from familiar to unfamiliar content areas and back again. So yeah, just doing it on a regular basis makes, I think, makes a lot of sense. So, Deb, you're up next.
How many of you are like heads are spinning like,
Yeah, I know, exactly. And I don't talk fast or anything like that. So I will post.
Mary, may
Yes.
I ask you one question?
Absolutely.
Regarding your discussion question, have you ever utilized, or do you think it would be practical to write or post what the discussion question would be, so that you don't have to repeat it?
that's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes if you have the questions pre-planned, they like to see them
Right.
in writing.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the person asked the question, and I wasn't listening at all.
Right.
And I'd be like, what? So it's nice that they see it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And there are people, of course, who send out, right, like study questions, right, before the class. And so they're prepared, right, yeah, absolutely. So again, this is, these are some suggestions. There are so many other ideas out there. I think the other thing that I can do, we'll post some resources where you can find additional ideas and suggestions for discussion-based classes.
So I'm one of those people, and I'm sensing others are too. I don't like discussions to get off topic. We have a lot to cover in a period, and I feel like I still have to have some control over it, and that's just me. And if you don't have to do a certain kind of discussion if it makes you uncomfortable. It never really works well when that happens. Oh, Mary, something just happened, and it wasn't me.
Never is. I mean, it's never the other person.
So I have I use the journal in Blackboard, and I ask the question there, and they write the answer. And it's a question that can't be found in the text. They have to use multiple sources to try to come up with the answer. And some of it involves their opinion as well. So this is written out, and I read them. Now when we get to class, that's in front of them. So when they have the discussion with the other people, they don't have to feel like they're put on the spot. They don't have to feel like they have to come up with an instant, brilliant answer. They've already thought this through. And they have things they can actually talk about. The discussions in my class are so rich because they can say, well, what about this? Or didn't you see that? And it's in front of them. And so the evidence they're bringing out is real evidence. It's not just what they thought they read. It's not just what they heard on the street. This is stuff that we read about, and it's real. And I'm using this to, to talk about this with you. So I just named it, use a pre-answered question for discussion. Sometimes a case study is good. So if you're studying a particular topic and now you have an example, and they have the text in front of them, the articles or the pre-written answer, now you give them the case study, and what they do in the group is try to apply all these things that they were reading about, writing about, to this another context. That always makes for a really nice discussion, and I think in a lot of your disciplines you might be thinking now of something like that, like an example. Here's an example. What would you say to person X based on what we've read and been talking about? So that works really well. Another is I have them, they love, to use their laptops in class. A lot of us say no, but if you think of some ways they could use them effectively, one is find a YouTube video that illustrates this, or that's going to get us thinking about this. Within seconds, they find something. Within seconds, they'll find something that is thought-provoking, related to the topic, and it just seems they really enjoy doing that. Another time I find the videos, and I put it there for them to say, well, look at this clip, or these images, and now how does this go with this, or how doesn't it go together with this? Usually after an activity, and Mary said this too, where they're sharing, and I do a lot of small group, we always come back to the whole group. And I use the whole group, what they say, and I create notes. Because what they were talking about in the group is part of the course content. So it's not like we're going to go off somewhere, and then what did you learn? In my class, what they learned is something they have to know. Because a lot of the ones in my class are going to be teachers. And so I feel like what they were talking about is really relevant in their knowledge and experience. Here's a very simple one. And it's not a whole class discussion. It's your neighbor. And you know what? They're participating. A lot of times we want to get our class to participate more. And this is one way. So they turn to people next to them and they start to talk, and then you have a time limit. Okay, what did we talk about? So instead of saying, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think, what did we think? And it just helps the class come together around a topic that was pre-talked out. And now they have a richer answer to give you. And they give it in clumps. So if you have 20 in a class and you have 7 participants, well, maybe everybody's opinion was heard because they turned and talked. So they felt like they were a part of it. So I had an example, we could try this if you like.
Yes, please.
Mary, where are these? I don't know how to, okay.
Oh, okay, we're gonna minimize
Yeah, I just
that.
wanna,
While you're
Just
looking,
minimize it and it's important. Got a question?
yeah, while you're looking, I just, so unfortunately for us, we often have to have a lot of students in our class. 20 is like a dream.
I know.
In our college, but to turn to your neighbor is something that I even use in the lecture hall. You know, when you have 60 or 70
yeah,
students, it is
that's
hard
about
to
as
have
all the talk they're gonna
any kind
get.
of discussion. But, at least posing, a thought question that allows them to discuss with the people next to them. And then I usually ask them to create some kind of summary response after talking with their neighbors. And at least they can get their opinions out in a way that's a little less chaotic, because an open discussion among that many students can be hugely chaotic.
Okay, just flipping through really quickly. Here's an example of one of those reading responses that I had in my activity 1, where I gave them a choice of reading various articles on the same topic. And they had to get together in groups and answer the question, why do you think our students are underachieving in science? Now the articles say different things, and they will have read different articles, so that's a great discussion. So they come together and talk about what their articles say, but together they had to come up and tell the whole class, why are our students underachieving in science? And you can say, give me the top 3 reasons. There's another thing they have to grapple with. What, out of all these things we read, what do we think are the top 3 reasons? And I always ask them to have evidence, have rationales. Don't just say it. Where did that come from? So that's an example of something, if you have a bunch of articles that are related. Another one that I like, and this one I teach child development and curriculum, and this semester. So we study curriculum models, but also our textbook talks about other things, about why those curriculum models are the way they are, and how children develop. And so I had them view 3 sets of videos. The first one was instructional. The second 2 on lessons were just a teacher teaching lessons. They had to view 3 math, 3 language arts. Then in the table, they had to talk about the questions at the top. What was of interest to me in these videos? What was different from my own experience? And the third is, what applies to the first textbook we have and what applies to what we were reading in the second textbook? So when they fill this out as a video viewing document, now they bring this to class. This helps them talk about it, because they forgot, and we teach 2.5-hour classes once a week. They watch these on Monday, now we're meeting on Monday again. They forgot a lot of that stuff, so this helps them refresh. So having them collect data on their readings in some funky way will help them have a better discussion, because they can remember what they read or saw. And there's the idea of the case study. This is one that was actually in our class. They were reading about 3-year-olds and their development. And so the case study was a 3-year-old shoplifted something from a museum gift shop. How do you handle the situation with the parent, the museum, store, and the child? And wow, that was so interesting. But again, you make them bring back what they read. In some way, shape, or form, they should be talking about development. Okay, so where's my, here's our turn and talk topic. I guess I didn't exactly put it in here. Are you ready? So what I want you to do is turn to people next to you. I like to say pairs, but some of you may be sitting in 3s. And the question is, should participation be graded?
My department.
Yeah, exactly. And you will be graded.
Wait.
One more minute.
Only some people would say it. So you have to be answered externally.
Okay, sorry, okay, so you got a sense of a good question. And I thought about a lot of ways to ask that question, like in a class of 60 or in a small group, or like you could have added a lot to it, but just leaving it kind of naked there, should you grade it, opened it up to a lot of possibilities. So what did we say here, just for example? Everyone agree?
Well, we did. We did.
And you did not?
We did. We had.
You had consensus. Okay, how about here?
I think my view, the consensus is it should be graded. There's a different ways of grading it.
Absolutely, but do you all agree?
Yes.
How about over here, should we grade participation?
They said that in a perfect world, no, but in this one, yes. And then it should be like a very specific process, how you go about grading it.
Did you all agree?
We didn't know.
Well, we're different.
Oh, you have a different group, okay, how about here?
Yeah, graded, but we said graded liberally. You know, it's hard to be very strict, and you're not standing over them all the time, so.
And what about here?
Yeah, we thought,
You thought you agreed?
yeah, for undergrads.
Undergrads only. Okay, how about here? What did we say?
I usually don't, we grade participation, we do, it's part of our syllabus, we always do, but I'm not crazy about grading participation. I think we have to give them opportunities for different types of participation. We deal with just freshmen, and so they have a lot of apprehensions and anxieties, and so we try to create situations where participation is going
It
to
happens
happen.
anyway, in the perfect world. How about here? You said depends. It depends.
On what the goal of the course is as to whether or not participation might be important. And we also, if you think about online courses, for example, participation is great in online courses where we're reading students' discussions, we grade their discussions, we grade, their posting, their response to their other students. And when Mary was talking about what's an ideal discussion, that's what popped into my head, is sort of an energized version of what we are looking for in an online class, which is you post your evidence-supported thoughts, and a student responds to your evidence-supported thoughts and extends the discussion, makes it deeper and richer. So I think it depends on what you want the students to get out of the class.
I'm going to change the question for people in the back. Why do we want a grade discussion? Why, if that was...
We actually didn't want
Okay, why didn't you want a grade discussion?
We felt that it was part of the student's responsibility as a student in the course, and that a course can't happen. You can't have, that a successful learning experience without student participation is part of the responsibility. But that being said, we recognize that there are benefits to grading it in terms of students that might not do well in other ways. Participation might be a way to help show their knowledge if they didn't do well on a paper or something, to be able to still give them credit for their learning.
Did you agree?
Yeah.
Back here. Did you agree? Raven?
Yeah, we did, yes. The thing that makes you a little more uncomfortable about the grading discussions and so forth is that it's much more subjective than when you give something written. You can point to certain things and you can have, patterns and so forth, and they can know in advance what you're looking for. That being said, I still think you can't, you have to give the advantage to those people that are, you have to grade and give, help people that are much more verbal than they are with their written.
Okay, and you want to share your... All four of you, what did you decide?
Well, we all agree that it should be graded, but our discussion focused mostly on the fairness of it to the student and how some students are strong in that direction, and so it gives them an advantage. But what do you do about the shy ones? How do you get them
Does it mean they
involved?
didn't read or, that's true. And how about over here?
Two of the three of us do grade, one does not. And the discussion then got on to the quality of the participation. Just because somebody's talking all the time, right, is that valuable or getting a positive grade?
Did you agree?
So, it was an interesting thought.
When somebody speaks and they're speaking for the others, you want to make sure the others agree. So we can't ask every 35 of us, I think, for their opinion. So that's why this kind of reduces the, the participation person per person. So that's, if you've never used it before, it's a way to get a lot of ideas out. Oops, here we go. And the reason I kept asking you if you agree is I have another strategy I use called consensus grouping, that you get together in a group and your goal is to reach consensus. So you essentially, and it has to be a topic that has multiple points of view and points of contention, so that they have the material in front of them, the topic, because you want it to be an evidence-based consensus, not just I believe this because I say so. Because here's what so-and-so said about it, and here's what happened, and here's what somebody else wrote about. And so if that's in front of them, and you say our job is to reach consensus, it depends on the subject, of course, and the question. It's usually quite a lot of discussion. And then in the end, you have your 5 tables or whatever, and they tell you what their table said. And every once in a while, and it happens often, they can't reach consensus, and that's very interesting too. But their goal is to reach consensus. Does anybody know why that's pretty effective in terms of learning? To ask a group to agree.
Because they require certain students to persuade other students, and in doing that, they're going to have points and...
Deeper. They go deeper. If you just say express your opinion, they all say what they think and it ends. If you tell them we have to agree, and here's all the possibilities, they go deeper. Because you're right, somebody has to convince somebody else or has to show them additional evidence. And it's always shown that when you ask for consensus, they have to go deeper. And what the teacher usually does is just walks around and listens, right? As a facilitator, sometimes you can interject a comment or a question and just keep walking. So I always see myself when we do this as a facilitator, not the person who's leading that. But now it's easy to debrief around the room, and you can put the reasons why we all agree or disagree. Becomes the content of the class.
So my question is around alignment and agreement and consensus.
Right.
And so I always say, well, you might not agree, but as a group, can you align around it? And then you know why you're aligning around
Ask
it.
them to agree first, and let them tell you they can't.
Right. And then
It's very, because if you don't force, it's like going into the voting booth. You have to pick somebody.
Right.
And you may not agree with everything, but you have to make a choice. So that's really great for you to tell them to choose, choose to agree, and then when they can't, then that's okay. But you're right, they can align, or there's other words we can use to describe it. Bill? Sorry.
An interesting thing with arriving at consensus is whether the consensus is arrived at based on the power of the argument, the persuasiveness, versus the strength, the personality. Yeah, the force of personality of the person who came out victor. And my general thinking is over the years is the force of the personality. More often than the persuasiveness of the argument. Yeah.
Okay, and finally, I've actually flipped the class where I have topics that I would like to present in a lecture, and I break them up into small bits and give them away. They have 15 minutes to prepare to teach us that, whether it be a concept, a stage theory, or it's going to be teach us about, what 4-year-olds are doing in terms of cognitive development, or something that in science it'll be, prove that this is so, what experiment would you do? And so whatever it is, they have 15 minutes to prepare it, and then they get up and they do it. And the last slide, or whatever that they present, has to be questions. And they're often not great. So because they're in teacher ed, when they ask questions at the end and run that final discussion about their small presentation, we talk about the questions. So we can talk about the quality of the questions. Is this a good question for a class? So now we can talk about teaching and try to get better questions out of them. But one of the examples, I had it before, then whatever their little presentations, it could be 1 slide, 2 slides, I post it in Blackboard as part of the notes for the course. Because I gave the content away to them, and I watch what they're looking at and what they're presenting. I kind of approve it before they get up there, make sure it's accurate and they used good information. So they come up with interesting images, they come up with short video clips, they come up with, some things that I would not have found to illustrate what it is I wanted them to find. And now it's time for Q&A. So I'll let you.
Well, and I'd like to know, I think, what challenges have you found in that maybe we haven't covered in trying to get students to talk and to have an actual discussion in class of the material? Was there anything that you've come across that we haven't touched on yet? Or do you have strategies that you've used that we haven't actually, because again, there are lots out there.
There's a lot of gimmicky ones that, pick a candy off the table. If you all have a Jolly Rancher, you get to this table. If you have an M&M, go over there. And, things that I've done. But I find that, the learning isn't any better or worse once they get to talk.
Yeah.
So,
do have a colleague who does, what is it that Dr. Jones calls it? Is it not the discussion game? The participation game, yeah, that he's developed over the years. And it works really well in his classes, because he actually does a whole point system, and so students get points. He sits back and he's basically the point keeper. And so students get a certain number of points for building on a comment, asking a question, something, bringing up a new point as opposed to just, oh yeah, I agree with that, you know, something, you might get half a point for that. But he's really honed this over the years. So again, it sounds a little gimmicky, but when you're dealing with freshmen and you're dealing with literature, a lot of them often feel, you know.
But that trains them too, to what we mean by good participation.
Right.
So they're being trained, just like you would train a young child to do another kind of task.
Doesn't he have an element of that game, which I borrowed for Journey of Transformation, where there are bonus points if everyone speaks before someone speaks twice, and so then it's like, I'm not pressuring you to speak. It creates social pressure in the classroom.
It's like the class party and the marble
and the
jar.
yapper to shut it.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it works for both both ends of the speaking spectrum.
That's right.
I will speak to Ed and ask him, I know he's got this written up, just, you know, because he has shared this presentation with people in the department certainly, and I think in other places, to see if I can get him to post it. I mean, you know, again, it might sound a little gimmicky, it might not be something you necessarily want to use with upper level students, but especially freshmen, and I think especially with students, they might even find it entertaining as a one-shot, you know, deal for you know, more sophisticated students. Have something, especially if you're trying to get them started on discussion. You know, they haven't had a lot of experience in your particular field. Maybe a lot of your colleagues don't expect them to talk in class. And so, you know, you're getting them, and you're getting them cold, especially if you're getting them as seniors and they haven't had a conversation since they were in, you know, university life, or 1201 or 2, or one of the, or Journey, or something.
You asked the question, should the participation be graded? It can be said it's a yes or no question. So what kind of question is better for discussion? Is this like a yes or no question?
Well, it was a yes or no question with, you know, with evidence. So you don't just say yes and sit there, you know, like, well, why? You know, explain why. It's assumed that you would provide a rationale, right? Right, a yes or no question is not good for discussion. Just sit there with it, like yes or no.
Yeah, whys, I think, any question that begins with a why is more likely to generate good discussion than something that begins with a who or what or when, right? You've got the 5 W's and an H. How works pretty well too. How did this happen?
What do you think of this?
Yes, yeah.
What do you think about grading?
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
What do you think about this discussion? We've just been having.
Right. Yeah. Although I do find that asking students simply flat out, what do you think about this text, doesn't get us anywhere. Because they often don't want to be the first one to say, I hated it, or they know everybody else in the class hates it, and they don't want to say, I loved it, or liked it, or I didn't understand it. So, yeah, I've been struggling. Actually, I'll tell you honestly, I've been struggling. I have a graduate class this semester that is filled with very quiet people. And so I am having this, I thought it was incredibly ironic. I gave this talk a version of it last week with the TAs, and now I'm doing it today, and I'm thinking, yeah, this group has challenged me this semester in ways I haven't been challenged in a graduate class at all. They're lovely and smart, but just are very quiet.
I was just thinking about that perspective of trying to get people to disagree, because a lot of times in discussions, everybody will say, yeah, and they'll just add on to that. So people don't want to necessarily challenge you if you're in my group. So I asked them, well, what would somebody who disagrees with this say? And if you were doing the literature thing, what you could do is you could have one critic who is supporting the piece and one who doesn't, and say, well, what would you say would support that? Or do you, and then say, do you agree with that? And then let's take the other side. And that way you can produce a discussion.
Right.
I like that. What would somebody who didn't agree with this say?
Right.
Because people will be free to say what they might actually think, but then they don't have to say it to me.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I do play devil's advocate too, even though I do love something. Or if I know they really correctly, they all hate Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. I'm an early Americanist, by the way, so yeah, I have my own challenges in terms of teaching material. And they hate the autobiography. But I know that now. And I go in and I use that to my advantage, because I know they're all going to hate it, hate him. They can't understand why he's a founding father anymore. It's like, really? This man's a jerk and an egotist. Yeah.
You said that you give people some text, and then you base on that. So
It's their text that they're using for the course. I don't give them something new necessarily.
Okay, you have a list of newspaper articles.
Yeah, things that
they have read beforehand.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Right, because then they don't just go into opinion. They use the ideas from those readings and so forth, which is what we want, right?
And so do you never want to hear their opinion?
Oh yeah, their opinion's always intertwined in that, and they often disagree. Often. And maybe they, yeah, I cringe when they do sometimes, because they're disagreeing with the masters, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, what did Plato know? What did Franklin ever accomplish? Really? Why should you listen to this man?
Here's an example. That question, what do you do with the 3-year-old who stole the thing from the store? She said, I would tell him that the police are coming and he has to go to jail. You did not read that chapter.
I mean, you know what her mother was like. Or father, one of the parents, somebody out there raising this child. So what we'll do, I usually make these sessions, extend them out a little bit, just so people can hang out and chat. Please have some more food. We're going to post a PowerPoint.
Where do you?
No, it'll be, no, actually I'm going to post it. There is a Center for Faculty Development website.
And you will sign this.
So yes,
Yeah.
and I will send you an email asking you if you don't mind to do a very, very brief little, survey. What did you think? What else would you like to see? That kind of thing. And I'm always open to ideas for topics. I mean, we're just getting the Center for Faculty Development off the ground. This is the first year. This is really the first semester. Spent last semester just getting things organized. And there are a few more events coming up. We have a talk on tenure and promotion by Nick Snow. We have a talk on by Kelly Geddard on the flipped classroom. And Phil Kao from Social Anthropology and Social Work is coming back to talk about life after retirement here and that kind of thing. He's been retired. And this summer, I'll be running a 3-day scholarship workshop. So basically like a scholarship boot camp. There will be stipends, there will be an application process, but to give people a chance to work on their scholarship in a community environment with getting peer review, talking about things like how do you deal with critical commentary, and I'm still putting it together, so if you have ideas or suggestions, please feel free to email me. But look for other events, and the faculty lunches. Each week there's one day. I've been trying to alternate a Monday or Wednesday and a Tuesday or Thursday. This room is used a lot. So we're trying to make it the room for faculty development events. So we'll see what happens. But otherwise, please make sure you sign the sheet. And I say, help yourselves to something else to eat. And thank you. I will remember to get vegetarian next time. This was a lesson. Thank